We're back for another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast. Feast week is now over. December is here, and that means conference play is on the horizon. Before that, we've got the Big East Big 12 Challenge, the SEC ACC Challenge this week, and then we've got conference play starting up here shortly. So a lot of good basketball to look forward to. Um, Before we take a look ahead to some of that stuff, going to quickly recap the Battle for Atlantis tournament, which happened Wednesday through Friday of last week. And then the Eras tournament, which was in Vegas, correct? That
Yep.
was won by Oregon yesterday over Alabama in the championship, which comes as a shock to many because Oregon people were kind of unsure of what to think of them. Bama was really one of the surefire like top 5 teams in the country coming into the year. And now here we are. Oregon wins that game, had to scrap for it, and now Oregon's 8-0. And if they're not ranked tomorrow, I don't know what more they need to do, but they're definitely going to be ranked tomorrow in the AP poll.
Oh, yeah, they'll be ranked for sure. I mean, they've been they had a great tournament, obviously, finishing off with a pretty exciting win against Bama. But, they've been a bit fortunate through this run. Like, they've had to make a bunch of comeback runs. They made a comeback run against A&M, had to come back against Portland earlier in the year, like we talked about. But, this team was super underrated coming into the year. They have 4 or 5 different guys that can go for 20 to 25 on any given night. Guys like Shellstad, who hasn't even really played that well this year. TJ Bamba, Nate Biddle, who has stayed healthy this year, he's probably been the unsung hero for this team. Keyshawn Bartholomew, he's had a really good start to this year. And then Brandon Angel coming over from Stanford, who really hasn't contributed all that much and hasn't really had to because they have a lot of underrated weapons on this team. And any of those 5 guys can kind of carry an offense for a stretch. Like a guy gets into foul trouble and somebody else can just come in and step up and be like the offensive hub for this team. So it's impressive the way, Altman went through the portal. I thought he did a pretty good job. And these tournaments are also set up Dana Altman super well because he's tough to prepare for on like a short turnaround. He changes his defenses constantly, switch and play like full court press at times. At times he'll pack it in, play a zone. He does whatever he needs to do, and he'll switch defenses from possession to possession, and his team is always ready for it. And typically, his teams take a bit to get going, but they started 8-0, and they should be ranked. And a healthy Oregon team can absolutely make noise in the Big Ten when there's teams like Indiana who are supposed to be at the top, and they've really struggled. They could be a top 3 team and really like contend to win this conference. And obviously, we talked about how it's going to be tough for them to win on the road in the Big Ten, but maybe they're just good enough to kind of run through this conference because there's no truly elite team. Like we say Purdue's elite, but I do think this Oregon team's talented enough that people overlook them coming into the season.
Yeah, they've definitely looked good, and like you said, Shellstad hasn't been very good. Been super inefficient. Hasn't really taken the leap that I think many expected him to, at least up to this point. Honestly, to me, it feels like he's taken a step back thus far from the progression that he made over last season. Fortunately for Dana Altman, Oregon has some players, and he doesn't need to be that guy every night because they have other guys to go to. And Bartholomew's been awesome. Biddle's been good. The one player for them that's been really surprising and unfortunate, I think, for Oregon that he hasn't broken out, and quite honestly appears to also have taken a step back is Kwame Evans Jr. I thought that maybe he might take a step this year. He showed some flashes last year. I think if I'm not mistaken, I think he was a 5-star recruit. Maybe a high 4-star, but he showed flashes last year. He's a really versatile player, but just can't seem to crack it into the lineup for many minutes at Oregon. And I think part of that is the moves they made in the offseason, right? They brought in Bamba, they got Angel to come over from Stanford. So and Biddle's healthy. So, his opportunity is a lot less. Where last year he got to play a little bit more with a lot of the injuries that Oregon had. And he did show some flashes, but I think he's not a great shooter, right? Like on the offensive end, he's very limited in what he can do. He's really strictly a transition player, and he'll have his nights, I think, where at least last year where he made a few shots and that really helped them. But overall, like in the half court offensive game, like teams are going to be able to help off him. So I think it's unfortunate for him, and I wouldn't at all be surprised if he's a guy at the end of the season where we're looking at like he's a guy that I could see entering the portal for sure.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, he was getting some draft buzz, like in the NBA draft. I guess it maybe didn't go as well when he went into the draft process, but yeah, the offensive game is limited. The shooting isn't fantastic, but he's a really good defender and he's super versatile. You can play him at the 5, like say Biddle goes down, which like God forbid he doesn't go down again because he's had so many injuries throughout his career. But you can play Kwame Evans at the small ball 5, and you can have success, especially with the other offensive pieces that are around him. So you're still going to have 4 pretty good weapons on the floor with Evans at the 5. So I do think there's like places that you can put him, and it's just really good that Altman has depth this year. He brought in Supreme Cook, who can put in some quality minutes as the backup 5, and he has guard depth. He has scoring depth at the guard position. TJ Bamba's made a leap. He played, I mean, he was with Villanova last year and like didn't play the role that he's necessarily comfortable with. He's more of an on-ball guard. He's not going to play in this catch and shoot, spot up system that Kyle Neptune really wanted. So Bamba's taken a leap. He's been the best guard on the team so far, but I wouldn't expect that to stay for too long. I think Shellstad overall is the most talented guard. But yeah, for Evans, I do think there's avenues for him to play, like if somebody were to go down. So I think that's a guy to keep an eye on.
Yeah. For his sake, I hope he kind of cracks in, because I think he can really help them in some areas, especially once they get to conference play with certain matchups. I think his defensive versatility will be very key. But he played 14 minutes yesterday. If he's not playing a ton of minutes, who knows how that kind of impacts confidence and his overall rhythm, especially on the offensive end where he's already limited to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, he'll be getting a phone call from every coach in the country if he enters the portal. Like he's going to be like a team's priority, like for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, he's that talented, and like it's just the shooting. Like he just needs to shoot the ball a little bit better. Shoot the ball 32% from 3 in a season on decent volume, and he's going to be like one of the best stretch 4s in the country.
Yeah. Now Oregon, they took down Alabama in the championship yesterday. Alabama's really gone through a gauntlet of a schedule here. Right over the last, 6 games? They've played Purdue, Houston, Rutgers, Oregon, UNC, and Creighton, right?
Yeah,
they have UNC and Creighton still to come. Yeah. But they've played those first 4 teams already, with UNC coming and Creighton coming. Those are, 2 games that are not very easy either, right? Like UNC has shown its flaws. Creighton has struggled, obviously, out of the gate, as we've talked about. But Bama has this 6-game stretch is very tough, especially as we've alluded to numerous times without Chris Youngblood and his floor spacing. They could really use him right now. But like overall, I'm not going to overreact to Alabama losing to Oregon yesterday. Like I think Oregon's a good team. Obviously, like they're winning games. It's hard to win at the college level. I don't care who you're playing, right? It's tough to close teams out, especially really good teams. And Alabama's just been on the losing end of a few of those games. But I think once they get Chris Youngblood back and they get into conference play, they're going to end up being just fine. So I'm not gonna get too worried about their loss to Oregon. Like Oregon's a very quality opponent that athletically can really give teams problems.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, like the biggest loss wasn't even that they lost to Oregon. They might have lost Latrell Reitzel, and that kind of just came out like a little bit after the game last night. That Reitzel's injury, he went down like I believe it was like early second half, and he was in a boot, so it might not be good. It doesn't look like he's going to play on. I believe they play on Wednesday. That's going to really hurt the shooting. Like, and you're going to have to add in more Aiden Holloway minutes, and that's like it's good for the offensive side, but I think it's going to hurt them defensively because Reitzel's probably their most like versatile defender on the wing, and that's going to be huge against a UNC team that has some really good guards on that team. So hopefully the Reitzel injury isn't as serious as it sounds like it is. They were worried about an Achilles, which is not ideal, especially when Youngblood is still out. And we talked about the spacing not being like top tier, like or like up to Alabama standards. And UNC might be able to pack it in against them. And like even like long term, like it really could hurt this offense, and somebody else is going to have to step up.
Yeah. I think what really could end up playing to Alabama's benefit here, though, if like Reitzel, it sounds like he's going to be out at least for the next couple games, if not longer, right? But I think that for the long term, Aiden Holloway is going to have to really step up here. And so I think that throwing him into the fire there against, like, he's played well the last few games, right? And so I think maybe throwing him into the fire against UNC, Creighton, seeing kind of how he holds up in more starter level minutes, having to guard more key guys. It might be to their benefit for the long term, at least. You never know when you're going to need him to play big minutes down the stretch in SEC play. Especially if he gets hot, like you need to have confidence. He needs to have confidence in his ability to guard some of these top level guards. So I think it could end up working out. Now it maybe won't result in victories for them against UNC or Creighton or we'll see. But I think that it could bode well for them in terms of their growth and development moving forward.
Yeah, I think it'll definitely help for Holloway's development. He's going to know that he needs to step up defensively, especially like him and Mark Sears alongside each other don't make for an elite defensive perimeter group. I think Philon's pretty solid, but it's just Holloway's consistency. We haven't seen him be consistently good yet early in his college career. So Reitzel just brought like a really consistent presence to this team. He will always hit the open three. He's always in the right spot defensively. It's just something that they're going to miss short term for sure. Like especially if you're not going to have Youngblood to help with the spot up game. So I'm a little bit concerned about the defense going forward, especially if Cliff Amore can't be like that elite presence on the back line and he can't stay on the floor for a long time, like we talked about in the last episode.
Right. Now, one of the other teams that was out there, Rutgers, Dylan Harper's looked all of what he was kind of talked up to be, right? I think he had a couple 30-point games out there, getting to the line at a very, very high clip. And he's the guy there. Like Ace Bailey's a really good player. But he takes some very questionable shots. It's almost like Ace Bailey's maybe watched a little bit of Caleb Love, and he's like, I want to take some of the shots that he takes. And I think, like you've said in the past, like he's going to hurt them down the stretch, especially against good teams because of the shots that he likes to take, right? Like I think there'll be games where he does happen to make those and he's going to win them some games. But at the same time, I think he's going to lose them more games than he's going to win them because of those shots.
Yeah, I mean, I think Bailey's super talented. He made some incredible shots against A&M. Like he made a shot out of bounds play or out of a baseline out of bounds play and just an off balance shot off the catch with 1 second on the clock. And it looked KD-esque, honestly. Like it looked super smooth. Like there's not many players in the country that are making that shot or even taking it, honestly. Like, I mean, Bailey will take any shot that he will shoot his team into games against elite competition, but he'll shoot his team out of games against bad competition. He did it against Kennesaw State. Like I didn't see the exact numbers from that game, but from what I watched, it wasn't pretty against Kennesaw State. But yeah, Dylan Harper looks every bit of like the number 2 pick in the draft. I think he's like surefire number 2. It's flag 1, Harper 2, which is kind of how everyone saw it. Everyone loved Ace Bailey to possibly steal that number 1 position, but I see Bailey as more of like I think he's a better Smith, kind of. I think they're kind of similar. Bailey's a better movement shooter than Smith, obviously, but Harper looks incredible. He has a super mature game right now for his age. He's making all of the right reads. Honestly, there's some shot selection stuff, kind of like Bailey. He likes to settle for his perimeter game maybe a little bit too often, or taking shots early in the shot clock. Like I've seen him take some step back threes with 20 seconds left on the clock, and that's just not his game. Like just get downhill and draw fouls. Like that's all he really needs to do at this point, just because he's physically dominant at his position. He's like 6'5", probably like 220, 225, and he's just he's a solid 3-level scorer. Obviously the perimeter game needs a little bit of work, but he's dominated. He dominated this weekend. He struggled against A&M. He went like 6 for 20 from the field, but I'm not super worried about that long term. I think he's going to have a great year in the Big Ten.
Yeah, for sure. Now the other tournament, battle for Atlantis, Oklahoma, which is a team that we were kind of down on in our preseason rankings in the SEC. I think we had them probably somewhere in that 11 or 12 range. And they're 8-0 now. Right? They took down Louisville by 5 in the Battle for Atlantis championship. Bit of a surprising start for them, to say the least.
Yeah, it definitely was. And honestly, I think we had them a little bit higher than a lot of other people had them. I think the SEC preseason poll had them 15, which I think was a little bit crazy. But the guard play has been way better than I anticipated. And it starts with Jeremiah Fears. I did not anticipate a reclass guard being as good as he's been. Like he's supposed to be a senior in high school, just like a lot of these guys that have stepped in as freshmen and have been really good. You know, like Flag's a reclass guy. Jaden Quaintance has been pretty solid. He just turned 17. Like, and Fears, I believe, is still 17, but he's looked super mature outside of like he's turned the ball over a little bit too much. He's averaging like 4 turnovers a game. But besides that, he's the lead guard on this team, and he was the lead guard on the team that won the Battle for Atlantis against quality competition. You know, they took down Arizona, and then they took down Louisville in the championship game. And then you pair him with Elvis and Duke Miles, and you have yourself a pretty solid backcourt. Like Porter Moser has a pretty good group there. I thought Duke Miles was going to be the lead guard coming into this season, but he's been more of the third guy. He's been playing more, you know, off ball, catch and shoot kind of game, but they've worked well off of each other. But the offense has been the better unit for sure. I'm still a little bit worried about the defense. You know, I don't love that guard trio necessarily defensively, and like the back line is whatever. I don't really love Godwin on the defensive end, although he's always incredible on the offensive glass. So that's where he's kind of bringing his value. And they've been super fortunate defensively from beyond the arc, opposing teams beyond the arc. They're allowing 26.5% from 3 this year, and they're allowing like 46% of their attempts to come from 3. So it's a matter of time. Like they're due for some regression in that area, but they looked every bit the part as like at least the middle of the pack SEC team. So I'm definitely giving them a little bit more respect than I gave them coming into this. Like and the late game execution was another issue I had, but they were able to separate themselves early enough in the game to where it didn't really end up mattering. So I'll give them their credit. I thought they had a really good week. Obviously, you know, they're sitting at 8-0 and they're probably going to be ranked.
Yeah, they definitely will be ranked. But one team from this tournament that will not be ranked any longer is Arizona.
No,
They
yeah, they absolutely will not be ranked.
what did they fall to? 3-4, I think.
3 and 4.
3-4, right? They've
Granted, they're all against
really,
good teams too,
yeah, but they're supposed to be a good team, right?
for sure.
Um, right. They've really struggled, and we've hit on this enough. I think the Caleb Love slander. Um, they just haven't been very good. So until further notice, until they look a little bit better, not going to spend a whole lot of time with Arizona, but there's definitely concern there for a team that we were kind of considering in that top 10 to 12 just a week ago.
Yeah, I mean, I had a 7 in the preseason because I thought the defense was going to be elite, and we've talked about how it hasn't been good since they gave up 103 points to Wisconsin. Like they haven't really improved all that much on that end, and the offense with the guards led by Love hasn't been nearly enough to take down any good competition yet. So there's a lot of concern there. I mean, we'll have something coming up about Arizona, so we don't need to spend too much time on them. Yeah, just there's definitely some worries with the Cats right now.
Yeah. One team that did impress in this tournament was West Virginia. Obviously, we talked about it. I think in our last episode, we talked a little bit about their win over Gonzaga, which was very impressive. DeVries and Javon Small were great. Javon Small was awesome until uh, their last game. I believe he had a pretty poor night, at least to start. But West Virginia looks like they maybe are going to be able to compete with some teams, which I did not expect. But again, it's these tournaments, and uh, I don't know how much to read into them. I think that come conference play, it'll be a little bit different. But I think West Virginia is maybe a team that can compete against some teams at home, give some teams a little bit of trouble. But when it comes to the top of the Big 12, like they're still nowhere near those guys.
No, I mean, I would have them like definitely middle of the pack now. Like I'd have them like they took down a conference foe in Arizona, which is so weird that they ended up playing each other in this tournament. It happened in Maui as well, just with like how the scheduling worked and new teams moving to the Big 12. So it was a bit weird, but West Virginia has one of the best wins of the whole season so far, beating Gonzaga in overtime. And all three of their games went to overtime in Atlantis. So, and I'm surprised they ended up winning two of them with their lack of depth. I mean, Javon Small and be extremely tired. I think they played 40 plus minutes in all three. So, but yeah, Small was unbelievable. And in the one game that he wasn't great, Tucker DeVries was great against Arizona.
Yeah.
So they're
Didn't
able
he
to
hit
kind
like
of play
six
off of
threes,
each
right?
other. Yeah, they've been incredible. I've always been super high on DeVries, and I think they're a great combo. I mean, Small is probably playing a little bit over his head. Like he wasn't anywhere near this at Oklahoma State last year or throughout really his entire career, but he looks like his game has matured a bit more, being a fifth year senior now. But yeah, I was impressed. And I thought they could have honestly won this tournament. I thought they were the better team against Louisville. They controlled the pace of that game. They just had one stretch where they had a 6-minute scoring drought with like 10 minutes until like the 4-minute mark. And they ended up getting down by 7, but they came all the way back and forced OT. But ultimately, they were so tired in that game that Louisville was able to run up and down on them a little bit in overtime and force a few turnovers. So, but overall, I'm impressed, and like they've definitely caught my eye a bit more.
Yeah. Um, Now Gonzaga, as we talked about, West Virginia beat them. Um, Not really a ton of concern. Like, yeah, that's not a great loss for them. But overall, like I think Gonzaga will be completely fine. They they just happen to catch a team in one of those weird early season tournaments who was shooting well, playing well. Javon Small was playing out of his mind, and they happened to fall. Now the interesting thing, right, was Graham Ike, right? He only played 14 minutes in that game, and based on his body language on the bench, I remember watching it at the down the stretch. He didn't look super thrilled with that. Um, that he wasn't back in that game, but Mark Few was really kind of rolling with Huff. Huff was giving them good minutes. He was scoring the ball. He was able to um, give them quality minutes, and they were playing well with him on the floor. And so I think he just ultimately said, I'm gonna roll with Huff over Ek for right now. I don't think Ek really loved that, but um, hopefully he respects Mark Few's decision there.
Yeah, and he did that in an earlier game this year too. I believe it was against Arizona State, where Huff had the hot hand and Ek just ended up sitting on the bench because they can't really play together. They're pretty limited mobility wise, and they both don't really protect the rim all that well. So they're not really a good combo to have out there at the same time. But yeah, when Huff's rolling, like you kind of have to leave him out there. And it's tough for Ek to kind of defend on the perimeter, especially against Hansberry, who I think he went like 3 for 8 from three. And they were just kind of trying to expose Ek in that way, just so like Ek couldn't get to his post up game on the other end. Like if he's not on the floor, like they're willing to live with Huff, making perimeter shots. And Huff had a stretch in that game where he did kind of dominate in the post. Go into his left hook. He did it 3 or 4 times in a row. And it kept Gonzaga in the game really. But ultimately, West Virginia was able to control the pace of that game. And Darian DeVries had a great game plan. They're walking the ball up every single possession, just trying to kind of shorten the game, which is smart against a Gonzaga team that all they want to do is get up and down and just create as many possessions as possible, just to continue to break away from an inferior team, which obviously West Virginia is an inferior team here. So I'm not worried about the Zags. Like we said, the MTs are a bit weird at times, and they can also determine March Madness success too. Like we've seen that, like UConn has rolled through non-conference, like they rolled through non-conference 2 years ago, and it led to them being like, they're just a tough matchup, like on short notice. So it's kind of hard to balance, like, what do you put stock into? What do you not put stock into? This is a situation where I'm willing to say like Gonzaga is still an elite team. Gonzaga is still the best offense in the country. So, and I think they're going to be fine come tournament time. Although they did maybe get exposed a tiny bit defensively, I'm not super worried.
Yeah, no. Now over the weekend we had a couple other pretty good games. Illinois played Arkansas on Saturday, and Arkansas just didn't look very good. I think Illinois came into they were favored by like 4.5, I think, so maybe 4. But Arkansas is just a really strange team, right? We talked about it coming into the year where they had a lot of these guys that were like the guy, or very like played high minutes on their previous team, right? Whether that was in high school or at a different college. And so, you have all these like talented players coming together and trying to figure out like how everyone fits together. And the one guy that Arkansas seemed to really want back, who was the only returning player, is Trevon Brazile. And he barely plays now. We talked about it earlier in the year, like maybe it was just a product of the hot hand. And Thiero has played well offensively, but I think that part of me thinks they're making a big mistake not playing Brazile more. I think that he's a good floor spacer. He can rebound the basketball. He can be a stretch 4 type guy for them. I think that like not playing him, like he was one of the leaders for this Arkansas team last year. Like you're really flirting with like losing him altogether, right? Because like I think eventually they're going to need him to step up in some games, and if he's not playing, like who's to say that he's not mentally checked out and just like ready to get out of there?
Yeah, I mean, you can play Brazil at the 5. Like you can play him
Yeah.
alongside Thiero. They just really haven't utilized any of that so far. I think Coach Cal likes having his center on the floor and Big Z, and then Adu as well. But Adu doesn't look 100% right now, and I think eventually those guys are going to split minutes. Although Big Z's been pretty solid on the offensive end, I still don't like his decision making, his shot selection, or he's not always in like the best positions defensively. And overall, I just think Arkansas's pick and roll coverage has been a disaster kind of to start the year. And their offense has been they were stuck in the mud for stretches in this game where you can't get stuck in the mud against an Illinois offense that has a ton of firepower. And it was led by Big Z's brother, Thomas Labovicic, who went 6 of 9 from 3. And Calipari was willing to give up those shots. And I think he was willing to do it for a little bit too long. Like, we talked about the scouting report stuff. Like, if you're willing to give that shot up, like, so what? But he made like 3 in a row at one point, and he's really not a guy that you want to leave open consistently. And Coach Cal just continued to do it, and he kept making him pay, and it opened up everyone else's game. So it put Arkansas in a really bad spot. And, I think they lost this game because of their offense, even though they gave up 90 points. They ran a ton of their offense through Thiero, and Thiero's great. Like, I think he's a solid weapon to have, but he's not a guy that they just bounce pass to him at the elbow and let him attack downhill. He got to the line a bunch, but I just don't think it was like truly efficient offense. Like, they cut off pretty much everyone else. I don't really think anyone else played all that well. Wagner and Fland were not all that good at all. Wagner had a nice stretch in the first half, and Boogie Fland was not good. He was downright terrible in this game. He couldn't buy a shot in the mid range to save his life, and he caught foul trouble, so he couldn't even stay on the floor. And they don't have a ton of guard depth that they can go to. Yeah, besides, one bright spot was Billy Richmond. He had a really good stretch in this game where he was making all of the right plays in this game. He made a few solid cuts to get some buckets, and I think he's probably going to play a role, probably a little bit more than the freshman that they expected to play more in Carter Knox. And I don't really think he's been all that good to start this year. But yeah, the offense is in a bit of a tough spot. We've talked about the spacing not being all that good, and John L. Davis hasn't really been great to start. I think terrible. He's averaging less than 10 a game right now. But the thing is, Coach Cal is not putting him in good spots. Like,
no,
I haven't seen him get an open look all year. Like, it's kind of like it's a your turn, my turn kind of offense. Like, they pass the ball to one guy, they either run a pick and roll or they ISO. And there's nothing creative going on. And that's been the knock on Coach Cal the last 3 or 4 years. Like, his offense is outdated. And that's kind of why they've lost the tournament. Like, he was fortunate to have all of the weapons that he had on his team last year. And they were one of the best offenses in the country, but they don't have that shooting talent now. So I think they're in for a bit of a rough season offensively, at least. The defense has been solid outside of the pick and roll coverage. So they're still a solid team, but I'm definitely worried about the offense.
Yeah, that was going to be my question, is like, are they misusing John L. Davis? Because it certainly seems to be that way. And kind of just letting his talent pass by, because, that was a big get in the portal for them. And he's shooting like 40%, 8 points a game, not really doing much for them at all. So, I know Coach Cal loves like his guys. And when I say his guys, I mean his Kentucky guys, the guys that he recruited to Kentucky, brought with him. That's kind of always been his thing, right? Is like, he brings in these freshmen, and he has his guys that he just is constantly going to. So it just feels like Davis has been the odd man out a little bit in terms of like getting those shots, because they're playing through Thiero so much.
Yeah, and I just look. Big Z is taking more threes than John L. Davis this year. He's taken 29. Davis has taken 28. And Davis's usage rate is just not high at all. He's sitting at 15% on the season. And like, that's not a guy you get in the portal to have a 15% usage rate. It's just doesn't make a ton of sense to me. I think they're trying to run a little bit too much offense through Wagner and Thiero, which, like, I just don't see that working long term for an elite offense, which is what they kind of aspired to be this year.
Yeah. Now on the Illinois side, Yaka Chonis, he seems to be playing pretty good basketball, minus the turnover issues, which have still been kind of a thing, right? He had 5 turnovers against Arkansas on Saturday. Still struggling to take care of the ball a little bit. Part of me thinks that'll improve as the season goes on, but still, maybe just a little bit lax, a little bit loose with the ball. But in some of these games where Illinois is playing top level Big Ten teams, he's going to have to value the basketball a little bit more because they're not going to be able to afford in some of those more physical Big Ten games to be giving away possessions down the stretch, especially when they're on the road.
For sure. And there aren't a ton of teams in the Big Ten that are really going to get after you defensively, like be super aggressive, force a ton of turnovers outside of like a Penn State or a UCLA. They'll force some turnovers. So I don't know how worried I am about it. And that's just something that I think you might have to live with Yakachonis. Just he makes so many good plays for others that you might have to just live with the bad pass every once in a while because no, he's looked the part outside of the turnover issue. And yeah, this offense has way more weapons than I gave him credit for. Like if Visic is going to space the floor for them consistently, like he hadn't really shot it well up until that Arkansas game, and Will Riley's just been just a fireball on offense. Like he can hit any shot from anywhere on the floor, and obviously like he's a guy that can maybe shoot you out of games once in a while because that's really all he brings to the table is his ability to score from the perimeter. But it's just another weapon that you can have to open up the middle of the floor for Yakachonis to make plays. So the offense is definitely ahead of schedule. I still need to see the defense perform against better competition. You know, they still gave up 77 points here to Arkansas. Like Thiero was able to get to the line basically at will. So they're going to need to perform a little bit better defensively, but you know, I'm starting to buy into them a little bit more just because they're probably a top 15 offense in the country right now.
Yeah. Now another game out there this weekend that was a very wild ending, Pittsburgh and Ohio State. I know you probably saw most of this game.
Yeah, I saw the whole thing. It was a wild, and I did not expect Pittsburgh to end up coming out with this win, especially being at Ohio State. No, it ended with a wild three by Zach Austin, trail three at the buzzer, and he ended up. I think he had 5 or 6 threes in this game. He's not really a shooter. He's like a 30% shooter for his career. So he stepped up late in that game. I was also impressed with the guard play of Jalen Lowe and Ish Leggett, especially Lowe. He finished with 28 points in this game. And I think this is one of the more underrated duos in the country. And they kind of showed it against a Buckeye team that's been really solid to start the year. Although I do have my concerns about Ohio State. And Pittsburgh, yeah, they stepped up without Damian Dunn, and he's going to be out long term. But I still see this Pittsburgh team being possibly a top 3 team now with all of the teams that have kind of taken a major step back or a major like downgrade from where we had them, like a team like Wake Forest, who's just been in the dumps on the offensive end. And that's not good for a Steve Forbes team. And Miami, obviously, we can talk about their loss to Charleston Southern, and that was just horrendous. But yeah, Pittsburgh they look like a dark horse in this conference now. Like they've taken the leap over those 2 teams, and you know, I'm pretty excited to watch them, especially when they get done back in like I think 4 to 5 weeks. But yeah, Ohio State had some concerns in this game on the defensive end, especially if Aaron Bradshaw is not going to come back. Like they don't have any rim protection besides Bradshaw. You know, he's out with there's like a little bit of a gambling scandal with him. So who knows if he's ever going to play college basketball again. But right now their center Sean Stewart, and we don't love Sean Stewart as a defensive piece. That's for damn sure. And they had to play small a lot in this game. They played Devin Royal and Evan Mahaffey in their front court, and their rim protection wasn't there. There was none at all. Jalen Lowe was able to get to his left hand against this like not so great perimeter group. He was able to get by Thornton. He was able to get by Michi Johnson consistently and score with his left hand. And you do not want Jalen Lowe to get to his left hand because he's going to get to the rim basically every single time. But so yeah, I came out with a lot of concerns for Ohio State, like despite their offense and their perimeter firepower being like one of the elites in the country. Like this defense is in a bad spot, and this is the test here for Coach Diebler. Like he needs to prove that he was the right hire here. He needs to figure out a way to manufacture, you know, some defensive efficiency. So I came out with a lot of concerns for Ohio State, despite it being a really good game.
Yeah. And then the final game from the weekend before we move on, just quickly want to touch on this one. Purdue played Ole Miss. Purdue won with under a second left. after Braden Smith missed the fadeaway. Got to put back to win 80-78 over Ole Miss, but overall, a great game here.
Yeah, it was a pretty unfortunate way to end the game. It was Braden Smith missed the fall away. It barely grazed the rim. Like Sean Padula was ready to grab the air ball. It grazed the rim, goes straight to Miles Colvin, layup, and that's basically how the game ended. But Ole Miss did a great job in coming back in this game in the second half. Like their offense is pretty impressive, or they have a lot of weapons. Like they were able to kind of expose Purdue's pick and roll defense through the pick and pop with Jalen Murray and Brakefield. No, Brakefield was when he caught the ball off the pop, he was either taking a three or attacking downhill and making a play for someone else. They ended up with 15 threes in this game. They made the Purdue defense collapse and they made a ton of shots. Morrell had a good day. Murray had a solid day. But it was ultimately the defense that Chris Beard typically leans on that it kind of let them down. And I wouldn't be surprised if it continued to let them down because they don't have the personnel to really run this no middle style that he's always loved. Like they have versatility, but there's no rim protection. And some of these perimeter defenders are a bit iffy. Like when you're trying to keep the ball on one side of the floor with the no middle defense, like you can't get beat into the middle. Like it created the defense collapsing a ton and it led to a bunch of open threes for Purdue. And Braden Smith was just, when he got into the middle, he was carving up this Ole Miss defense. And he was the reason why they won this game. Like Colvin had a great day, but Smith finishing with 11 assists and making all of the right reads. He looked like maybe the best point guard in the country, like pure point guard in the country in this game. He just absolutely carved up Chris Beard's defense.
Yeah. And he's going to win them a lot of games, right? He's just his overall control, his pace, especially being a junior now, being asked to do a lot more. Like he seems primed and ready to kind of take on the role. And if he's not, like Purdue's not going to be very good. But as we've seen so far through whatever they've played, 7 or 8 games, like he clearly looks ready to take that step as their floor general and their one of their top scorers.
And it was crazy that nobody believed in this guy. Everyone thought that he was kind of like a Zach Edey merchant or whatever you want to call it. They thought all of his assists were because of Zach Edey. Like he would just dump it inside and Edey would go to his right hook. Like, no, Smith is an elite point guard who makes some of the greatest passes I've ever seen from a college point guard. And it's extremely impressive to watch. And he's made a leap even from last year. Like, and obviously he had to. Like they're running a ton of pick and rolls for him now, and he needs to be able to make the right reads. And he's been getting better every single game. Like he had turnover issues early on in the year, but he's really cleaned it up since those first couple games.
Yeah. Now, before we jump into the Big East, Big 12 battle, and then ACC, SEC, going to do another round of buy or sell. I got a few topics we want to go through here. With the first one, we'll get right into it. Buy or sell, Arizona will be a middle of the pack Big 12 team at best.
I mean, it feels a little bit crazy to call them that, but right now I have them basically middle of the pack. I have them as the 7th best team in the Big 12. So I have teams like Cincinnati and Texas Tech, and I still have Baylor ahead of them. Like Baylor's been, obviously they've been better. We have concerns about them, but yeah, I think Arizona's like dead in the middle of the pack. So there's definitely some worries. There's some other dark horse teams like West Virginia, like they took them down, and technically it's a non-conference game, but and like BYU had a pretty good week. They lost to Ole Miss in overtime in the same arena as the Purdue Ole Miss game this weekend. So their offense looks really good too. So I wouldn't be surprised if they could leapfrog Arizona if Arizona doesn't figure out their guard situation or Caleb Love needs to make a few shots. But so yeah, I'd say they finished like right in the middle of the pack, like 7 or 8.
Yeah. I think for right now I'm going to sell. I think that they're going to figure some things out here. We'll see once they get to conference play. I still think that they're kind of like in that. I still feel like they're around 5, maybe no higher than 4. they're definitely behind those top 3 teams. But I could see them maybe at 4, but I feel like they end up settling in and playing some decent basketball here and end up finishing maybe around 5. Um, but based on the way they've played so far, it clearly doesn't look to be the case. But we'll see.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they figured some stuff out. Tommy Lloyd's never been put in this spot as a head coach before. He's always had teams top to bottom, and he might not have that this year. So we'll see what kind of adjustments he has to make, and hopefully he can make the right ones. And if he doesn't make any adjustments, they're gonna finish like 8th at best. So
Yeah.
hopefully they can figure that out, and maybe it just comes down to them making more shots.
Yeah. Now the next one, the Big East gets 3 bids in March at the most.
Yeah, it's looking like 3 right now, right? I mean, Creighton is getting a little bit dicey with them. Like they haven't really won a big game yet. Like that game against A&M would have been huge. But right now it's looking, I mean, UConn they're going to be a tournament team. Like we're not going to sit here and say they're not going to make the tournament after that. It was a tough week in Maui, but they're going to be fine. And then St. John's and Marquette are obviously locks to get in. But I do think if Creighton doesn't get their act together, obviously health is part of it. I would say they get 3. I believe they only had 3 last year as well. So, and this conference is definitely worse at the bottom. So if a team like Creighton or a team like even St. John's, like if they happen to stumble and lose some to the bottom of like Georgetown or Seton Hall, who lost again the other day, or like Villanova and Providence, who don't look like tournament teams, like Providence is a really tough place to play. And if they come out with some wins, like they're probably not going to build enough of a tournament resume to get in. So it's going to hurt the conference. It's going to hurt the teams at the top. So at 3, but I don't think there's any more. I think Creighton would be the team that gets left out.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at this conference, right, I think there are really only 5 possible teams that could make it. Right, with those 3 we mentioned, UConn, Marquette, St. John's, and then Creighton and Xavier. I think those are the only teams that could potentially make it. Like I don't buy like Villanova, no chance. Providence, no. All those other teams at the bottom, no. So I think it's a 5-team race for 3 spots, and probably 2 of them are locks. So it's really like 3 teams vying for 1 spot, maybe 2 if one of the teams gets really hot, Creighton or Xavier. But right now, I would say probably 3 is the number, with St. John's, Marquette, and UConn being the 3.
Yeah, and Xavier hasn't even looked like a tournament team. Like they almost just lost to South Carolina State. Like they had to scratch that game out. They looked really bad against Michigan too, and a Michigan team that they're fine, but they've had a lot of issues as well. Like they lost to Wake on a neutral floor, and Wake that loss doesn't look very good anymore. So I think Xavier's in a little bit of trouble. Like the defense hasn't really stepped up, and the offense hasn't been like a top 20 unit like everyone's expected. So I think they're in some trouble, and they could drop a bunch of games to that bottom half.
Yeah. Now the last one, Houston is not a tier 1 title contender.
I think they still are. I think obviously they've been a bit unfortunate in these overtime games, but you can't really get taken to overtime by San Diego State, who's down this year. They're not this elite team in the Mountain West like they have been in the past. But the problem with Houston right now is their shot creation and their point guard play. Like Miles Uzan can't even stay on the floor. Like he's in bed in foul trouble in basically every game for his last 3 or 4. So, and he just hasn't looked like the guy to step up for Jamal Shed. Like early on in the year, like that game against Auburn, he looked pretty good. But besides that, I haven't really seen enough from Uzan to say that he can replace Shed and, make this team like a top like 3 favorite to win the title. Like I had them. Like I had them as my number 1 team entering the season, and I had them as the number 1 team before this little stretch they've gone on. And it's just the shot creation, like inside the arc, that's been an issue. Like Emmanuel Sharp has shot it extremely well, and Cryer has been solid as well, but they just haven't been able to get any work done on the interior. And and then when they play teams that are just as physical as they are, it makes it a pretty evenly matched game. So overall, like in a tournament setting, like there's always been concerns with the offense, but I think there are a few more concerns this year. But I trust the defense to say that they're like they're still in that tier 1 as a title contender, maybe like the beginning of tier 2.
Yeah. Before I speak to this, just want to Brian Dutcher, like with what he's doing with this San Diego State team, he's just an awesome coach. He just finds a way to do it with less, more times than anyone I've ever seen. So hats off to him. But Houston, I guess my thing, not necessarily with Houston, but with college basketball as a whole, is like who really is a tier 1 contender right now. Because I think you could, to me, like with Houston, I say no. Like I don't think they're a title 1 contender. Just for the reason that like I don't know who is. It's very like everything is so in flux right now. It feels like, 1 week you're really high on one team, and then they lose a couple games the next week, and you're like, okay, maybe these teams are the teams to consider. It's a really tough thing. Like for me, I still have Kansas up there just because of their consistency, and they've won big games. Right. So it's a really weird scene in college basketball where I think everything, as basketball is, but I think more so now with the current state of college basketball, everything is very matchup driven.
Especially in March, it's definitely matchup driven for sure. Like if you get a tough draw, like it's tough. And Houston has got a tough draw in the last couple tournaments. Plus, they can't stay healthy. Like Jamal Shed got hurt in the tournament last year, and that kind of ruined their chances when they had a really nice path to the Final Four, where I think they could have easily won the national championship. Like could have faced up with UConn and like given them problems. So, but yeah, I think it's just a little bit. It's an overreaction, I think, to call them not a title contender. I mean, they're obviously a title contender, but
Yeah.
it's just I think I'd have them like back end of tier 1. So like we'd look at it, it'd be like Auburn, Kansas. I would have Duke in tier 1, and then I would have Iowa State, Houston, and that would be my tier 1. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I just don't see any other team that can really slide in. If we had to pick 5 teams, I don't really see another team that could really step in and take that over.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, I think right now I have a short tier 1 list. I think for me right now it's Kansas and Auburn. And then I have a short tier 2 list of, Houston's in there. With some of like Iowa State, some of these other good teams, Duke, even though they're going to be ranked kind of probably closer to 15 this week, but I still think they're going to improve, and defensively they're going to be so solid that in the tournament they're going to be able to give teams trouble. But I think Kansas and Auburn right now, in terms of like overall consistency, veteran presence, coaching, like those are the 2 top teams, I think, in terms of like who I would trust as tier 1 title favorites.
Yeah. And it just Uzan's just got to stay out of foul trouble. If he can be a more steady point guard presence, I'm not going to have any concerns with this team, barring injuries again. Like that's what's taken them down in the last 2 tournaments. So I'm not super concerned, but watching it wasn't very inspiring. Obviously, like if you can't outscore that San Diego State team, like there's something wrong with the offense.
Yeah. And with that, we're also going to be starting a new episode of the podcast separate from what we typically do. We're going to do a much shorter episode, probably about 30 minutes, that is strictly for betting. So we're going to cover some betting topics, give out some best bets, and talk through some of that stuff to supplement the articles and the content that we're putting out. Not sure if you want to add anything to that, Cody.
Yeah, no, definitely excited for that. Like, obviously, like, I mean, I love listening to my own betting podcast, so I think it's a, a pretty good. It's going to be a pretty good thing for us to be able to do, just to be able to throw out some more content for some people that are maybe are looking for a little bit more throughout the week. And I think it'll just be exciting in general, and I think we'll have a good time with it.
Yeah, for sure. So other than that, a lot of content today, as I said. Keep an eye out for this episode, and then obviously the betting episode that we mentioned. Planning to record that tomorrow. And other than that, just we'll have some articles coming out for some game previews and best bets and other stuff like that. Merchandise should be done now. So be on the lookout for that. Look forward to seeing everyone repping it. And other than that, we'll talk to you in the best bets episode, first edition, coming out tomorrow. Until then, we'll see you next time.